U.S. naval forces are participating in joint exercises with Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. These maritime exercises in the Red Sea aim to counter Iran and its influence in the region. Bradley Bowman is Senior Director for the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Thank you.
So why are these exercises happening? What prompted this?
You know, the short answer is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Its efforts to sow regional instability, export terrorism, and inch slowly toward a nuclear weapons capability has pushed Americans and Israelis and Gulf Arab governments closer together. You know, there's been a long, kind of quiet, below the radar realization in some Arab capitals that the Islamic Republic of Iran and not Israel was the threat to regional security. But of course, in 2020, we saw the Abraham Accords, where we saw UAE, Bahrain, and Israel normalize relations, and that private realization became a public acknowledgement. That public acknowledgement led to all kinds of cooperation in a variety of economic, finance, agricultural, tourism sectors, but also in security cooperation. And this exercise that we saw in the Red Sea in the last week is the security manifestation of that increasing aligned view among these three governments about the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So then what does the Pentagon get out of this? You know, what's the importance of the Red Sea region to the Defense Department?
So, you know, Central Command, right, the combatant command responsible for the wider Middle East views Iran as its number one threat. And I would say that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And so anything we can do to build a more capable and unified coalition to deter aggression from Iran and push back on what they're doing, the better for Americans. And what are they doing? Well, generally speaking, they're not conducting conventional warfare and aggression against other states, although they did launch ballistic missiles at two bases in Iraq and gave more than 100 Americans traumatic brain injury. And they did, attack the oil facility in Saudi Arabia. But generally speaking, since 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran, as many of your viewers will know, have used asymmetric means, developing proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like militias in Iraq, like the Houthis in Yemen, and they've used those proxies to advance their security objectives while escaping the consequences. And how do they do that? They do that by smuggling weapons, and they smuggle weapons often, at least in some part of the journey, through the maritime domain. And that's why this Red Sea exercise is so significant, because it focused on interdicting shipments like that.
Okay, you mentioned interdicting because these exercises are focused on what's called visit, board, and seizure tactics. What is that about? And, you know, I wonder if you're starting to get on Iranian ships. Isn't that going to, blow things up a bit?
Well, the U.S. military and others already have done that. I mean, there have been examples the last few years where, according to international law and normal protocols at sea, there is some ability to do this. So we've seen that happen before. And when we've done that, what have we found? We've found lots and lots of weapons being shipped from Iran to the Houthis in Yemen. And so, this is not me guessing. This is not me saying this is something we should do in the future. We're already doing it. I would argue we're not doing it enough, right? Yemen is home to arguably the world's worst humanitarian crisis, which is being driven primarily by the war. We're putting a lot of pressure on the Saudis. Some of that is deserved. But we're largely ignoring the shipments of Iranian weapons to the Houthis. And why would the Houthis negotiate?
Right, but
they
Brad,
continue to have reliable access to weapons.
But Brad, Iran's not going to like Israelis or Americans boarding their ships and seizing their weapons. I mean, isn't that going to escalate things?
Well, we've done it in the past. I mean, don't take my word for it. The UN, a panel of experts have talked about Iranian. So this isn't like some hawkish American talking. This is the UN, right? Not known for exactly being hawkish, has acknowledged that the habitual systematic effort of the Islamic Republic of Iran to ship weapons to the Houthis. And of course, they're not going to like it, right? Anytime someone is doing something bad and they get caught in the act, they're not going to like it. But, I'm sure the Saudis don't appreciate missiles being launched at their cities. And I'm sure the crew of the USS Mason, they had 2 cruise missiles launched at them in the Red Sea in 2016, didn't appreciate that either.
So, Brad,
I'm more concerned about regional security than how the Iranians might feel about it.
Well, this isn't the first time that Arabs and Israelis are doing joint military exercises, as you mentioned before, but it's the first time that it's really out in the open. What does that mean?
Right, yeah, no, so it really is the first overt military exercise between Arab and Israelis. I mean, this really is a landmark big deal in my view. I mean, you have the Greek-hosted INEO host exercise, which is an air exercise where the Israelis and the Emiratis both sent aircraft and crews, but it was kind of below the scene. Sometimes they put the respective flags on there, sometimes they weren't. But this was an overt exercise with Israelis, Americans, Emiratis, and Bahrainis working together overtly in the Red Sea. That's a first, and that's a big deal. And it helps improve the readiness of each of the navies, helps them operate more effectively together. And as we've been discussing, it sends a very positive, in my view, deterrent message to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So finally, Brad, you know, the Pentagon moved Israel this year from the U.S. European Command to U.S. Central Command. What's the significance of that?
Right. So the Pentagon, as many of your viewers will know, divides the world into combatant commands. And in the past, Israel fell into the jurisdiction of European Command. And that was primarily for years a function of the fact that Israel was kind of estranged from most of its Arab neighbors. And following these dynamics that I've been described and following the 2020 Abraham Accords, if you look at the Pentagon release, they said the region has changed. Israel's relationship with its Arab neighbors have changed. So we're going to shift Israel, which is in the Middle East and will remain in the Middle East for the foreseeable future, will now fall underneath Central Command. So what does that mean? It means more exercises like this, which I think are good for regional security and good for American national security interests.
All right. Well, Brad, thanks so much. I appreciate you being on the program.
Thank you.